Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the PivotBoss Pre-Market Report. I am Frank Ochoa, aka PivotBoss, with analysis for January 7th, 2016. Here's a look at the daily time frame of the ES. Before we were talking about that 1991 key level, right? This is a key level here where we saw price close just below that area in the previous session, but more importantly was the key CLVN, the composite low volume node here at 1981. Failing to hold that zone, I mentioned before, has two downside targets, primarily 1935 and then a follow-on target to 1879s. In overnight trading, we've already reached the first target. It's been a significant sell-off. As a matter of fact, if you look at this 1991 level, you can see after price closed that level, price rallied, or should I say just bounced into that level, was defended perfectly at it, and then you saw the downside follow through and price discovery phase into 1935s. This is what we were talking about before. Eventually, we're going to see significant expansion from this level, from this range. And once we do that, we have key levels to identify as our downside targets. And so far, we've already reached the first one in the first session. The next idea here would be to see how price continues to play out as we move forward, because any bounces back into 1981 will likely be defended as a selling opportunity for a continuation and follow through into 1879. So right now, the fact that prices are well below at 1991 and especially that 1981 CLVN implies further overall downside price discovery ahead. Again, any bounces will likely be seen as selling opportunities into 1981 for a move into 1879 and perhaps all the way back down into 1814. Let's take a look at crude oil now. Here's crude oil on a daily time frame. Very similar here. We've gotten downside expansion from this one as well. We talked about the narrow trading range that had developed here. And I mentioned before, if price can't hold above that 35.35, that would imply a continuation into two downside targets. The first one being 33.31, which is the 25% monthly expansion target. And the second one being the 31.28 level. And similarly, we've already seen a significant sell-off in overnight trading, and prices have already reached that first target. And very similar to what I mentioned with the ES here, any bounce is likely to be met with selling pressure. So any bounce into 35s likely offer an opportunity for bears to defend for a shot at seeing a continuation into 31.28 and the next significant downside target, which is 28.91. That's the next major target that we're going to shoot for on the downside given this expansion from this range. So again, we're going to watch to see how this thing plays out. If this bounces back into 34.80 to 35, that offers an opportunity for bears to redefend for a continuation downward into these targets. Let's take a look at gold now. Gold we talked about before as being a potential expansion candidate. If crude oil was going to break to the downside, it was likely that gold was going to break in the opposite direction. And I talked about that 1088 key level. Bears were going to look to defend that level, but if price pushed above and closed above 1090, the expectation was that we'd likely see a follow-through back toward 1123.80 with a potential to see a move all the way into 1169.70 in the weeks ahead. Short term, I talked about this low right here, the low of the month thus far. Has a primary monthly target at 1112 with a secondary monthly target at 1130. So for the rest of the month, very easily we could reach these upside targets. Those are the targets to play to. Now keep in mind, any retest of the 1088 to 1083 zone, so any pullback into that zone should be seen as a buying opportunity by bulls for a continuation higher into these targets. Failure to hold above 1083 would suggest a return back to 1055. Lastly, let's take a look at the NQ here. Here's the NQ in a daily time frame. We talked about bulls wanting to defend the CLVN in the bottom of the range here at 44.49. There was various attempts to do so, and eventually we saw the breakdown. We closed just a couple of ticks below it, and that's what I mentioned before. If we close below 44.49, it would be an indication that we're likely going to see follow through to the downside to these targets. The first one being 43.11, the second one being 41.74. Similar to the ES, we've already reached that first downside target, and you can see how Buyers have already come in to defend just off that target to take profits after the current downtrend. Now, very similar to the ES again, any bounce is likely to be met with selling opportunity for a shot at seeing another round of weakness downward into the next downside targets, which can be played to 42.26 and 41.74. So again, we've been sustaining the current overall downtrending market. Bounces should be met with selling pressure. I would say that any bounce, especially into 43.92, would likely be seen as a selling opportunity for a continuation downward. All right, that's it for now. Let's see how this thing plays out heading into the rest of the session. Good luck and trade well.